Heading into 2020, President Trump has touted a historically low unemployment rate, strong consumer spending, and record stock market gains. But is that all Americans are actually going to vote on?
According to a survey by CNBC, jobs and the economy are key voter issues, but so are healthcare, immigration, and the environment. Joining us to discuss the issues that voters will be focusing on in 2020 is No Labels senior advisors Margaret White and Ryan Clancy. They're also authors of The Ultimate Guide to the 2020 Election, 101 Nonpartisan Solutions to All the Issues That Matter. Welcome, guys. Great to have you both.
Thanks for having us.
So what inspired the book? What can people hope to get out of it?
So the jumping off point for this book is actually that famous Daniel Patrick Moynihan quote, "We're all entitled to our own opinion, but not our own facts," except now we do have our own facts. And that's making it, we can't agree where we are as a country. It's making it impossible to even talk about where we want to go. So the idea for this book is, if you want some grounding as to what's really happening, this is your reference guide.
So Margaret, what's really happening?
Well, I think what's really happening right now is there's a lot of talk on the campaign trail about a lot of different issues. And one of the things that our citizens, our members all across the country have been asking us is, what's true? What is the new Green Deal? What is Make America Great Again? How do we break this down? What are just the facts? And, I think that's really where we came up with this book and starting to talk through what does it look like on the left, on the right, what are some other ideas, really more from the center, to start having those conversations.
So you talk 101 nonpartisan solutions. So what are those? So give us a taste of some of the solutions.
Well, what's amazing when you go through on issue after issue is the distance between where the far right and the far left is relative to the rest of the country. And you can look at it on issue after issue. So take an issue like climate change. Like, your two choices in the political marketplace now are basically, well, it's a hoax invented by the Chinese, or you can have the Green New Deal and the government's going to weatherize 100 million buildings. Well, there are answers in between that. One idea that is starting to get some traction is this idea of a carbon fee and dividend. That it's a market-based approach, but the revenues go back to citizens. So that's just one idea. You look at immigration. Is the only choice really basically, Fortress America or basically open borders? And it is on issue after issue. There's just this 60% of the country that is getting offered policies that are pretty binary and not at all reflective of what they actually want and what the real options are.
So, just on the Green New Deal specifically, polling actually shows it's very popular, and of course you can't really compromise with science. But putting that aside, I want to put our cards on the table a little bit. Saagar's on the right, I'm on the left. We do this show together every day, so we do have a sort of bipartisan conversation every day. Interview Newt Gingrich, interview Michael Moore, interview Bernie Sanders, interview Don Jr. in the show today. Like, we're one of the only places that does that. However, No Labels ethos is around this idea of coming back together to this bipartisan civility. What I want to ask you is, has it occurred to you that bipartisan consensus that brought us trade deals that shipped our jobs overseas, that brought us stagnant wages, that brought us the destruction of unions, that brought us endless wars, that brought us selling our communities out to big pharma and creating the massive addiction crisis that we have, the worst that we've ever had in our nation, has it ever occurred to you that the reason that people are so angry and so frustrated with the political establishment and so at each other's throats is exactly because that bipartisan consensus has been such an utter disaster for the working class and middle class?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention with our political system today. And we're not looking for lowest common denominator compromises between the parties on each issue. We're trying to look forward and look at, well, where is there possible compromise, looking towards the future, that doesn't have some of the same drawbacks that you just described from previous bipartisan policies that failed.
But I think, that's the real question, right? Which is that you talk about coming to the center. And one of the things that we look at on the show here, Margaret, is that the center often provides pretty much a continuation of the same policy, and that ultimately, if you can find common ground here in Washington, I think people should be very scared of that, because that usually means that it's at the benefit of moneyed interests and the moneyed class. So it seems that, in the era of 2016 and 2020, the most populist elections of our time, really a return to almost 100 years ago in our politics. How do you reconcile some of the stuff within this book with the populist moment that you're seeing right now?
I mean, I think I'll just give an example. I mean, one of the groups that we've, really worked a lot with and helped cultivate is this group of members on Capitol Hill called the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Sure.
They've come up with a lot of bipartisan solutions, and it was really at the beginning of this Congress where they said, these solutions, these compromises, these really difficult policy decisions aren't actually getting any airtime on the floor. And so they negotiated with Nancy Pelosi and changed the rules. And I think more and more of those types of things, structural things that they can continue to focus on. We have a whole chapter on fixing the structure in Congress in the book. It'll help break through some more of those tough issues, give them more legs and more room to have conversation.
Why do you think we have Donald Trump? Why do you think we have 70% of Americans saying that they are furious with the establishment here, the bipartisan consensus establishment here? Why do you think people are so disgusted with that they would elect someone like Donald Trump?
I think you just hit on it. There was this bipartisan consensus that everybody, to some extent in both parties assumed worked, and a lot of the country looked at it and they said, well, it doesn't work for us. And so Trump, in a lot of respects, was just a repudiation of all of that.
But isn't that what the Problem Solvers Caucus is? It kind of is like conservative Democrats and Republicans, right?
Yeah,
No.
it's like the neoliberal centrist status
No,
quo.
I tell you what, if you look at the members in this caucus, they don't define themselves as moderates or centrists. You got liberals in there, you got conservatives. What you see from them is a relentless pragmatism. Like I think one of the biggest problems with Washington is that everybody kind of operates on what I call the king for a day delusion. They just assume if we can just get to the next election and beat the other side enough, we'll ram everything through we want, everything will be great. Except that never happens. Or in the rare instances when it does, like with healthcare in 2010 or tax reform in 2017, you push something through, and the second it's through, the other party tries to undo it. Like, that is no way to run a country. We are pretty evenly divided. You still need to get 60 votes for most things in the Senate. And so unless there is some path to common ground on most of these tough issues, you're not getting anywhere. You're not getting a single party immigration solution.
But let's take healthcare as an example, right? Obamacare was freaking Mitt Romney's healthcare idea. It was the most, bipartisan consensus attempt to do something corporate-friendly, health insurance company-friendly approach to things.
Yep.
And no Republicans supported it. And now you've got Rahm Emanuel out there running around saying, well, we can't go so far as to have Medicare for all. We have to have a public option because that's the only thing we could get done. They couldn't even get a public option done when they had a supermajority in the Senate and control of the House. So that old way of saying we're going to come together and work, that is broken. I mean, that's why a lot of people look at Donald Trump coming in from the right and saying, I'm going to break this whole thing down and we're going to have a revolution from the right. Or Bernie Sanders on the left who says, we're going to organize the multiracial working class and they're going to, Joe Manchin, they're going to come to your backyard if you don't support everybody having health care, and they are going to make you do it. Don't you see that there's an appeal to that? And that old way of thinking that Republicans are going to work with Democrats, it's a fantasy land.
I mean, I see that there's an appeal to it. I just would ask, does it actually work?
Well, does your way work? That's my question, though. I mean, on healthcare. On healthcare, again, Mitt Romney's healthcare plan did not get one Republican vote.
Right. Well, look, if you talk about Trump, what you're describing is two different things. There's what works in a campaign and what works in governing, right? So his approach worked in 2016, but since he's got in, what's the legislation he's actually got through? There's not a lot of it.
Massive tax cuts for rich people.
Well, I mean, actually, I don't disagree.
It's a bipartisan
and
consensus.
that was generally bipartisan.
Yeah.
I think part of what Krystal is getting at is that it seems that the public wants a kingmaker type strategy, is that they do want somebody either on the left or the right to come in and to basically sweep it all over and replace it. And I just am curious how we reconcile ourselves to that politics. It seems like, this is a very kind of a traditional Washington way of looking at the way things get done. It doesn't seem to have worked.
I mean, I think that part of what we need to do too is the incentives are all structured in such a way where the loudest voices that are on the far left and on the far right, they're getting the most airtime. They're actually being talked about. That's really what we're hearing these days. So, I mean, I think part of what No Labels is trying to do is organize the more silent majority of people that are out there to have a voice, own their voice, and step up and demand something different.
What do you make of the fact, though, that like Medicare for all, very popular, Green New Deal, very popular, $15 minimum wage, very popular? Isn't that a silent majority in its own way as well?
Well, the problem with those is when you actually take one step down in the polling, which is Medicare for all conceptually is pretty popular. Well, what if it means there's no private health insurance? Then support drops by 30%. Green New Deal is conceptually kind of popular. Sounds good, but then you look at the underpinning ideas under it, not so popular. And so, I do think that this basic idea that the only way forward is to steamroll the other side, it is fatally flawed. It leads to one of two outcomes. Either, like we were talking about, you ram something through on a party line vote that the second the ink is dried on it, the other party will try to undo it, or you don't do anything. And that's the thing. I think that's the big missing question on the campaign trail. I hear all these candidates talking about what I'm going to do as president. What I don't hear is any of them saying how. What is the realistic path that gets from here to an actual piece of legislation on your desk?
But how is it not a fantasy to think that Mitch McConnell, who I was there at Fancy Farm in Kentucky where his supporters erected a graveyard in honor of the fact that he prides himself on being the graveyard of any sort of legislation. That guy doesn't want to work with you. How is that not a fantasy?
He has not been helpful at all to a lot of things we've been trying to do, certainly. Yeah. And I think the thing is Washington needs to be able to walk and chew gum, and here's what I mean by this. If you're a Democrat, and I am, by the way, and you want to take back the Senate and House majority, absolutely. Nobody's saying sacrifice your principles, don't try to win elections. What we are saying is when the election is over, there has to be some period of time where you actually bother governing. And nobody bothers doing that anymore.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Margaret, I think
Thanks,
we'll
guys.
agree to disagree, but it was an interesting
here.
discussion. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.